President Donald Trump is attempting to make good on a campaign promise to impose new stiff tariffs on some of America's largest trading partners. An order signed by the president over the weekend calls for a 25% tax on imports from Canada and Mexico and a 10% tax on imports from China beginning tomorrow. But today, the White House agreed to postpone tariffs on Canada and Mexico for at least 30 days in exchange for more cooperation or the northern and southern border. Speaking to reporters last night, President Trump acknowledged the emerging trade war could lead to higher prices for Americans.
We may have short-term a little pain, and people understand that, but long-term, the United States has been ripped off by virtually every country in the world. We have deficits with almost every country, not every country, but almost, and we're going to change it. It's been unfair. That's why
Threats of new tariffs are being greeted with mixed reactions. Speaking last night on CBS's 60 Minutes, Republican U.S. Senator Mitch McConnell of Kentucky suggested the move doesn't make much sense.
It will drive the cost of everything up. In other words, it'll be paid for by American consumers. I mean, why would you want to get in a fight with your allies over this?
Kentucky's junior U.S. Senator is also questioning the policy. Fellow Republican Rand Paul said on social media, quote, "Tariffs are simply taxes. Conservatives once united against new taxes. Taxing trade will mean less trade and higher prices," end quote. Last night, Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau called for retaliatory tariffs on billions of dollars of U.S. imports, including bourbon. While that move appears to be on hold for now, it's causing a lot of concern. Congressman Morgan McGarvey of Louisville, the only Democrat in Kentucky's congressional delegation, says Canada's decision would, quote, "devastate our Commonwealth's signature bourbon industry." He adds Kentucky would, quote, "bear the brunt of Trump's misguided and impulsive leadership," end quote. McGarvey co-chairs the Congressional Bourbon Caucus with fellow Kentucky Congressman and Republican Andy Barr. In a statement, Congressman Barr remained supportive of Trump, adding that he will, quote, "continue to advocate for our bourbon producers to ensure they are not unfairly impacted as we take necessary steps to safeguard America's economic interests," end quote. Meanwhile, Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear is echoing similar concerns, saying this policy would hurt Kentucky families.
95% of the world's bourbon is made in Kentucky, and all the bourbon worth drinking. Yet, a state that voted for this president by more than 30 points is going to feel the impact of these actions. Think about the farmers that support the industry, the people in the bottling plants and the cooperages. I mean, these are our families, our neighbors.
Tariffs on U.S. exports, including bourbon, were implemented from 2018 to 2021 during Trump's first presidency in response to the U.S. hiking tariffs on imported steel and aluminum. The Kentucky Chamber of Commerce says American whiskey exports dropped 20% during that time. Despite looming tariffs, some distilleries in Kentucky are expanding. New Riff Distilling in Newport in northern Kentucky announced that of this year, their products will be available in all 50 states. The Northern Kentucky distillery opened for business just over a decade ago. The goal was to become the region's go-to whiskey producer. The business started with 8 employees and a single location. They now have 80 workers and multiple facilities for bottling and storing their products. President Molly Lewis says in today's saturated bourbon climate, New Riff must keep evolving.
We have 3 barrels aging per person, per resident here in the state of Kentucky currently. That's a lot of bourbon, a lot of barrels. So it's a time of needing to distinguish ourselves. We constantly want to bring up our neighbors and bring up other fellow distilleries in the state of Kentucky.
New Riff is the only heritage distillery in northern Kentucky, meaning they age more than 50,000 barrels each year. We'll hear much more about their expansion and evolvement tomorrow night, right here on Kentucky Edition. Tariffs were just some of what Senator McConnell discussed last night on 60 Minutes. Kentucky's longest-serving U.S. senator stepped down from his leadership position at the beginning of the year, saying he now feels more free to be outspoken. He says he hasn't talked with the president for quite some time. He also says he thought pardoning those convicted of rioting at the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021 was, quote, a mistake. So what will he do going forward?
I expect to support most of what this administration is trying to accomplish. So what happened in the past is irrelevant to me.
You said that January 6 was evidence of Donald Trump's complete unfitness for office.
I said shortly after January 6 that if he were the nominee for president, I would support him.
Even if he's unfit for office.
I'm a Republican. I don't get to decide who gets to be president. The American people do. And you have to admit, they did. And he's back.
Though Mitch McConnell stepped down as the Republican leader in the Senate, the 82-year-old has not announced if he'll seek re-election in 2026. Many Kentucky Republicans considering running for his seat have said they're waiting until he makes that decision. Well, one Kentucky Democrat is already exploring a possible run. State Representative and House Minority Floor Leader Pamela Stephenson has filed with the Federal Elections Commission to raise money for a U.S. Senate campaign. But that doesn't guarantee she'll run. And she has yet to file as a candidate with the Kentucky Secretary of State's office. The Louisville Democrat told the Lexington Herald Leader, quote, "My team and I are aware there is a long road ahead of us, but we are prepared to do the work. As House Floor Leader and hopeful nominee for U.S. Senate, I am making it my mission to elect Democrats up and down the ballot in 2026, end quote. Stephenson has served in the state house since 2021. She ran unsuccessfully against Republican Russell Coleman for Kentucky Attorney General back in 2023.